Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I am joined today by Jason Mackey, our senior sports writer with an emphasis in Pirates and Penguins right now, I think is the way we're going with it, Jason.
That's a mouthful, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I feel like I know what I'm talking about with Pirates, at least to a reasonable degree, and I've been over at Penguins before, and I'm getting reacclimated over there. So if I sound like a doofus, it's because I'm just a doofus, not because I'm not experienced with those teams.
Absolutely. So we are going to be debating some Pirates rebuild today. Obviously, the Pirates just wrapped up their third. I guess it's not technically their third consecutive 100-loss season because 2020 was a kind of a lost season in terms of playing a full schedule. But they had a 100-loss winning percentage that year, so I'm going to count it as kind of a third 100-loss season in a row. We're going to debate the rebuild, but before we get into that. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you enjoy this video, please like it to help us out with the YouTube algorithm. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our new YouTube channel so that you can get all of our videos. Going to be a lot more breaking down the Steelers this week after the blowout loss in Buffalo, so make sure you're subscribed for that. And please check out our promo deal down in the description. I'll leave a link for you. It's $6 for 6 months of access to postgazette.com. You can get everything Jason's writing, everything I'm writing, everything all of our Steelers and Pirates, writers are writing. So check that out. It's a great deal. We'd love to have you on board. And with that, we're going to get into this, kind of debate that I would like to get into with Jason. I'm going to kind of represent the side of people who believe at this point in the Pirates rebuild that things could be going better. This is not going to be, from my perspective, a rant about spending money with regard to the Pirates, although I believe pretty strongly that they should be spending more money. But that's not something Jason and I are going to resolve today. We're going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of developing, drafting, developing, and how we should be grading Ben Cherington, the general manager, in his baseball operations department 3 years into this, basically tanking, in order to acquire talent. So I think my first question for you, Jason, is, I did a story a couple of weeks ago where I compared the amount of talent the Pirates were getting out of AAA at this point in their last rebuild, which was 2010 when they lost 105 losses under general manager Neil Huntington. And at that point, I think they had about 7 wins, a little over 7 wins above replacement, according to Fangraphs value of production from guys who were primarily developed in AAA under Neil Huntington's regime. This year, they haven't been so fortunate. If you count Jack Sawinski, I think it's a little closer to 5, but I don't count him toward that total because he was promoted basically straight from AA, did not spend a lot of time at AAA before he went on his nice run to open the season. Other than that, it's basically Ronzi Contreras, O'Neal Cruz, Rodolfo Castro as the only guys that have spent a ton of time in AAA under this regime who have been productive players. Isn't that kind of a concerning sign? That we're 3 years into this and that they seem to be behind, what I would consider to be the 2007 to 2010 rebuilding pace.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a concern. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's okay that they're not getting a ton of production out of these players, but I think they went into it with the idea that was going to happen. We've seen them revamp a lot of stuff at the lower levels. And to me, AAA right now is just sort of an extension of the major league team. And to put it in crass terms, it stinks. There's not a ton there. If I look at next year and like what their depth is going to look like, a lot of that is AA guys coming up to AAA, meaning Nick Gonzalez, Henry Davis, Quinn Priester, Mike Burrows made the jump a little bit early, Matt Frazier, Leover Peguero, Blake Sable. I could go on, but I mean, that is like the core of the AA team going to be taking their first laps at AAA. And prior to that, I mean, you had G1 Bay, who again has not had enough of a sample size to really do anything meaningful. The guys you cited, and that's it. And it's been a roster that is too thin. I remember last year it was like embarrassingly thin. But what do you do? How do you get those guys? Anybody who is worth it, at that level is in an organization. Like there aren't just random dudes floating around between AA and AAA who are good baseball players who just aren't in an organization. You don't just like go into free agency and sign a bunch of tweener minor leaguers. Like you might find a guy in the Frontier League who's worth something, but that's not how you revamp their farm system, your farm system. And that's what Cherington has sort of done, where like he's mortgaged the pieces that he's mortgaged. We can have conversations about to what degree. I think some of the trades have been bad. I'm not going to sit here and say that like a Josh Bell trade, like they maximized value in that. They didn't. They got some guys in Musgrove, Tyone. You look back, they got what Sawinski was part of the. It's hard to keep all of these straight. Is that the Anderson one? There's the Frazier one, whatever. There's been like 19 trades. So, I mean, what I'm saying, Adam, is you can't always address that level. And right now it's more important for them to be better at the lower levels on volume than it is to have, a little bit better at AAA, I guess, is the way I would, if I had to defend it, that's how I would defend it.
I think that part of the argument you're making here is something I've heard before too, and I'm curious to hear your perspective from a bit more of an insider, role. I've heard a lot of people say that maybe the Pirates just don't view AAA as a kind of massive place for development to happen, and that AA is the place for serious prospects, and that AAA is basically, for lack of a better term, going to become a place for service time manipulation between AA and the big.
No, that doesn't happen.
These guys.
That does not happen. What are you talking about? Come on.
Yeah. So do you think that it's do you think they view AAA more as a purgatory and more as a place to maybe try out some spare parts from other organizations that they want to, take a look at and see if they can tinker with, and that, the AA is really the place we should be looking at, not just once we get through this period of having to get those guys that you invested in the lower minors up to AAA, but maybe even moving forward, that it's just a matter of you're going to see the better homegrown stuff coming from AA, and maybe you're going to see the spare parts from other places going to AAA.
Yeah, I think the best organizations do both. I really do. And I think you're always going to have pluggers at AAA, right? Like guys that are just, you're a good pro. You're going to teach young guys. You don't have what it takes quite to get to the major leagues, but you still serve a purpose. That's going to happen at AAA. That doesn't mean you should have a roster full of Kevin Padlos. I mean, you can't. That's just, you better have guys coming up. And I would look at the Pirates developmental system, anybody's developmental system. I think some guys, you have problems with them where they're better served in like a lower risk environment, or where they can work on things and maybe the game's not as challenging for them. And then there are guys that maybe need to take something that's a little bit further on and say, how does this play against borderline major leaguers? Like I can't take this and go face Justin Verlander with this swing change that I've made, but I can face, I don't know, Cam Aldred's probably a bad example, but you know what I mean? Like a guy that's just a solid AAA pitcher and you're getting those reps. I mean, I think there's going to be value there. There's going to be value in AA. There's not going to be like a lot of things in baseball. It's not going to be like always this way, always that way. They need to create these separate environments. And I think they've done a good job to this point, but I would like to see guys getting better. Like, what is concerning for me when we talk about development in the minor leagues? Mike Burrows is crushing it this year at AA Altoona. I mean, he is just cruising, and they wait a while to bring him up. And then once he gets up there, it's almost like he was seemingly unprepared, or the results weren't good. He did not pitch well. I feel like there's a better way to do that. There's a better bring him there earlier, get him acclimated. Maybe you give him a little bit of a taste. I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, what I'm looking for, Adam, is to create these environments and then to be able to go from one to the other a little bit better than they have.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that segues in well into my next point, which is that I think we've, with maybe the possible exception of Ronzi Contreras, at the higher levels and certainly the big league levels, the development, if it's happened, has taken a long time. I think we finally saw Mitch Keller, take an important step this year and kind of show that he can be, at least a mid-rotation guy, maybe not an ace the way I think some people had been hoping. But you don't know. But I think regardless, he finally took some steps this year, and that's the good news. But the bad news, if you're looking at Pirates development, is that it took them 3 years to kind of unlock that, with him pitching regularly at the major league level. Again, 2020 is a little bit of an outlier because he didn't get a ton of starts. No one did that year. But still, this development regime had, 3 years with him, and it took until the middle of the season before things really kicked into gear for him. And I can't look, down the major league and AAA rosters and see a ton of guys who I can say this guy definitely got better or this guy definitely transitioned well, other than Roansy Contreras. And what kind of concern is that? Because obviously you have these guys with more promise at the lower levels, but don't you want to see a team that's or a franchise that's good at developing talent also get those guys who aren't on our radar, who are not the Mike Burrows and the people that we're bringing up every time we're talking about, the minor leagues? Don't you want to see some of those guys that you're not expecting, to come and get better with the Pirates?
Man, totally. I won't disagree with you one bit. I get, probably chastised a lot for saying that they can do this, but I do believe that they can do this. You can win without spending a ton of money. Look at the Guardians right now. But you need to do what you're talking about, Adam. You need to bring guys out of nowhere and help them get better. You need to help the guys that you do have improve. I love what Mitch Keller did this season, but sort of concerning for me is how it happened. I mean, you've read about this. Mike Persak was the one that got this, and he did a terrific job getting it. But it came from Dewey Robinson. The guy they brought in from Tampa basically looked at Mitch's four-seamer and said, no, that stinks. You're going to throw something else. Like, how did the current group look at Mitch Keller and they were like, yeah, four-seamers, top of the zone, curveball off of that. They're sort of stubbornly banging their head against the wall, and a new guy comes in and they're like, no. And that's how we solved Mitch Keller. Like, great that you did it, but the process kind of stinks. And so I'm not saying that to explain their development is awful, but I would like to see some more improvement. I would like to see, Cal Mitchell be able to take the next step. Bly Madris, he gets up there, does nothing in Pittsburgh. They lose him. Then he goes to Tampa and he becomes the International League Player of the Series or whatever the heck they called that when he stars for the Durham Bulls. Like, that's concerning. That's the same stuff that was happening to them earlier. I do like, at least offensively with O'Neal Cruz, we saw him come up and he's struggling chasing pitches. He's not using the opposite field. He's seemingly forcing it, and they got him to chill out a little bit. He was a little bit better against left-handers. I mean, obviously he stunk defensively. You have to fix that, but he made improvements, I would argue, during the course of the season. I think Rowanzi's made improvements. Even Jack has made some improvements. So it's not like there's been nothing, but has Henry Davis gotten better? Has Nick Gonzalez gotten better? Has Peguero gotten better? I go back and forth. They've shown signs. It hasn't been consistent enough. And I mean, to me, when you're going to spend what little money they do, stuff like that, player improvement, development, homegrown stuff, like that's not optional. You have to do that. You have to find that improvement somewhere. You're never going to win.
Yeah, and I think part of what's concerning for me too is, and I'm going to get into your 10 thoughts to start the week that you wrote on Monday, and making comparisons to not just Cleveland but to the rest of baseball. But before I kind of get to that, I think part of there's two other areas that I really look at as things that I thought Neil Huntington did well. In his lead up to making the Pirates competitive in 2011, 2012, which is what I think Pirates fans should be looking for now. Is maybe you're not going to have a winning team in the next couple of years, but you want a team that's going to start to look interesting. And two of the elements that I think are missing is that Neil Huntington was able to take, kind of just like you said, just depth guys from other organizations and plug them in to be decent pieces. I think Garrett Jones was a good example of someone that when this team was good, he was no longer the focal point of the offense. But they haven't found a Garrett Jones yet. And I think the other area that I look at is the bullpen. Even terrible Huntington teams, he did a really good job of kind of inventing bullpens out of nothing and taking a lot of guys from other organizations and turning them around to the point that you could say, hey, this can be a useful piece in the future. And I don't think I expected to see a bullpen full of them at this point. Not like they have, 5 or 6 guys that you're saying that about. That like, wow, what a change that this organization made for this guy. But I'd like to see more than David Bednar, and I'm not even sure I'd put him in that category because I think he was kind of a legit prospect or a legit, option when he came over here, even if we didn't expect him to do as well as he's done.
Yeah, I mean, your category right now, and I agree with you. Like that's a big thing. Neil did it well. They need to do it better now. I mean, that category for me is like Chase DeYoung. That's it. That's the pitcher they've taken and like made better. Maybe Will Crow. I'm not going to supply Manny Benuelos as somebody there. Like you couldn't pick Manny Banuelos out of a lineup. I mean, Sam Howard had like a little stretch of that, and then the crackdown on sticky stuff came in, and Sam went bye-bye. They really haven't. They've done 1,000 dumpster dives that have netted nothing. It's a funny game to play, like random Pirates pitchers that you can pick, like Enyel De Los Santos or Johan Ramirez, like these just random dudes. And I do agree with you that in the Huntington regime, in the former group, like they would find something useful for these guys and find some pitch they're not throwing, some mix, some way to play with the toy differently. It would work again. And this current regime just hasn't done enough of it. And like we saw down the stretch, the bullpen was bad. And I don't know what the process is for fixing that. I feel like it's probably a lot on the pitching side. It's not just relievers or just starters. Also saying that, like, they should be credited for some of the work they've done with starting pitching. I think like Johan Oviedo has been a very nice success story for them. Brubaker has gotten better, but yeah, the bullpen's been rough.
Yeah, and I think that's just one of those what I consider are these structural things that are going to make or break a rebuild. I don't know, but I just know that they're just kind of little warning lights for me.
Yeah.
When you have your check engine light on, sometimes the car's still running, but you notice when that thing is happening. And to me, that's kind of how I see the bullpen, is that no, it shouldn't be front of mind for you and me. And we're going to be talking about the big prospects. We're going to be pitching big innings. We're going to be talking about position players who are going to, the Pirates hope hold down positions for 5 to 7 years. But when you're not getting those little things right, to me, that's where I start to notice, that maybe things aren't going at the pace that they should be, to be on the timeline that I think people are expecting. I did want to get into what I mentioned today, or mentioned it was your 10 thoughts that you published on Monday. Mostly comparing the Pirates to the Cleveland Guardians, which I think is a great franchise to compare the Pirates to, because they're very similar cities, similar markets, similar culture in terms of sports. So I'll let you just kind of riff a little bit on that and how you would chart the Pirates on that scale of progress if Cleveland is where you're wanting the Pirates to go.
Yeah, no doubt. And if you look at Cleveland's roster right now, with the way they built their team in a way that is largely attainable for the Pirates. And that's why I wrote that. I mean, they have traded well, they have drafted well, they have developed well. It doesn't require a massive payroll. I think their payroll year beginning 2022, their 26-man payroll was like $68 million, something like that. I mean, I don't know what the Pirates was, but it was in the same ballpark, literally and figuratively. That's something that Pirates fans can say, look, we can spend that money on players. Why can't we be good? Well, the Pirates have taken trades and they've basically done the opposite of a good trade, where you take your prospects, you give them to somebody else for a star player who's not a star player, meaning the Chris Archer trade. And the Indians, or the Guardians, have done that trade the way it should be done. You have a guy, Francisco Lindor, he prices himself out of your market, and then you turn him into prospects. Jimenez and I forget the other guys that I wrote about. Jimenez was one in there. I'm going to look back in my notes here and cheat, but Ahmed Rosario as well. I mean, and I went through, because this was going on. I was reading something on MLB.com breaking down the wins above replacement according to Baseball Reference on all of the MLB playoff teams. And so I extracted these numbers and put them on a spreadsheet and sort of looked at, like, okay, what are the Yankees doing? What are the Padres doing? What are these teams doing? And I mean, that stuff's not attainable for the Pirates. They're not going to, go get, from traded players, the Padres had 32.8 B WAR. That's just not happening, and like the Astros struck it big on the international market. They had like 16 wins above replacement coming from international players because of like Framber Valdez and Jose Altuve. Like, that's a once in a generation sort of strike, and great for them. And that's why they're good. But if I'm a Pirates fan, I look at this and say, like, well, what can we have? Is there a section of the store in which we can shop? And you can do the things that the Guardians have done. The Pirates have had relatively big pieces that they mortgaged for things, and Josh Bell and Joe Musgrove and Jamison Tyone, Adam Frazier, and I could have spent all of my 10 thoughts like sort of stacking that out. I didn't, but that's the general idea. You need to execute on those trades. The Guardians have also drafted extremely well. Like Shane Bieber's a draft pick. Tristan McKenzie's a draft pick. The Pirates have the same access to that stuff, and people love to get negative about the Pirates, but like they spend all of their draft allotment. Every dollar they're allowed to spend in the draft, they do. So if they screw up the draft, they should be criticized. Like they're spending more than the Guardians are. So, I mean, that's when I look at this stuff and say, like, it is possible to win in Pittsburgh. It is possible to create a homegrown model. Now, your what do you want to say? Margin for error is a heck of a lot more thinner than it is other places, but it is not impossible. So that's the general theme of my piece, Adam. If anybody hasn't read it, it's on there, and it's basically comparing what the Pirates have, which is woefully short. By the way, I calculated the Pirates WAR that they got, and it's like just embarrassing. They had like total of 15 WAR this season. I think 3.6 was from pitchers, something like that. 6.9 total, and I think like net 3.7, whatever. I'll stop reading from my notes, but it was just like, oh man, I needed a drink.
Yeah, it was rough. And one of the things I did want to kind of pull at that thread on the Archer trade. And oh, by the way, I will throw the link to Jason's 10 Thoughts post in the description. So please check that out. In addition to the promo deal that I mentioned earlier, but one of the things I kind of wanted to do with you is flip over the Chris Archer trade a little bit, because I think we can understand why flipping Chris Archer or why flipping Tyler Glasnow, Austin Meadows, good prospects like that for shorter years of control for a guy like Chris Archer is not something that the Pirates should be doing with any regularity. I think we've seen why it's blown up in the Pirates' face. But I think an important factor in why that trade ever happened in the first place is because the Huntington regime was more or less giving up on Tyler Glasnow, and that they could not unlock what he has found with the Rays. And that is what made the trade so bad, is that we all knew he was talented, but the Pirates clearly were, to use your term from earlier, banging their heads against the wall with him. I think my fear would be, if I'm a Pirates fan now, you've seen guys like that go have success out. Like Clay Holmes, I think, would probably be the number one example. What would be your reason for optimism that we're not going to continue to see these guys get to the big leagues and then continue to ram their heads into the wall and then end up getting shipped elsewhere because the Pirates lose patience with them, and not because they're too stupid to see that they don't have the talent?
So with Clay Holmes specifically, I would argue that they were impatient, but they were not stupid. And here's the line of demarcation where that goes for me. Like, they figured out what he needed to throw and how he needed to throw it to be successful. Clay Holmes is not doing much differently in New York than he was in Pittsburgh. Like the rate of his sinker, where he was throwing it, how he was gripping it, how it was coming out of his hand, all of that stuff is largely the same. Where the Pirates can be blamed in the Clay Holmes deal is getting offered trade return for somebody who was slumping and saying like, yes, I get a couple new toys. Let's do it. Like Clay Holmes was he was actually pretty good at the beginning of 2021 and then starts pitching bad. He's just a pitcher who's like not throwing well, going through a slump. There's nothing wrong. He's not hurt. He just wasn't pitching terribly well. And the Pirates said, oh, well, here's basically Clay Holmes being Clay Holmes again. You're going to give us something for that? Great. And baseball trades are made like that all the time, where one team sort of preys on another team's impatience or inability to see something or whatever. And the Yankees did that. So I would argue that their sin in this is impatience, not I couldn't see it. Like they could see it. They just need to realize, like, let it go. Let it go. Not everybody needs to be traded for a prospect. Sometimes we need to have a little bit more faith in our own guys. Like, I would hope that's the lesson that the Pirates took out of the Clay Holmes thing, is like, we got the process right. We just need to stick to the process for a little bit longer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Another thing you brought up in the post, I think one of the most interesting stats you pulled out was that about 40% of playoff teams, all 12 of them, so we're taking out the outliers of like the Astros and, teams that were getting a ton from one place or another, and you're just kind of averaging things out to what playoff teams are getting on average. And I think the number that stuck out to me was 40% from trades in terms of wins above replacement. Again, I kind of look at what the Pirates have right now in terms of valuable guys, and I don't see a lot that they've gotten out of trades. And again, that doesn't mean that there's not a chance that they'll get more from these guys at the minor leagues, but I'm also at the point where, Like, you should be at the end of the arc here. 3 years into this, we're not at the beginning. We're not in the sell-off period. We're at the end. This is where you're supposed to start seeing some results. Some guys, even if you're a 100-loss team, there's supposed to be signs. I think I have it in my notes here. I think it's Contreras, and if my laptop will ever turn on, Contreras and Bednar, in terms of meaningfully productive players that they've gotten from trades. How do they, especially because you don't have that capital anymore in the form of a Jameson Taillon or a Josh Bell, big league assets that you can flip for prospects. Now that those guys are gone, how do you get from where the Pirates are to that, maybe big league average in terms of getting guys from trades? Because we saw the last iteration of the Pirates succeed with guys from trades.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, I hate to be this guy, but it probably means like a Reynolds trade, a Keller trade. I want to see them extend Reynolds too, believe me. But, if you're going to restart this cycle, and that's sort of what this is, it's a cycle where players earn themselves out of your market and you try to mortgage them into multiple younger, cheaper players, which is exactly what the Guardians did. Like, Reynolds would be next. And you could get a lot for him. And I don't think they'll do it before this season, but I do think that if he's performing really well next season, they would absolutely look to trade him. And Adam, just to clarify something I pulled up that spreadsheet, the trades was 41.8%. And that is all playoff teams factored in. So what is it? It's 12 this year. So the average among the 12 playoff teams, you're getting 41.8% from trades. And I mean, I don't need to see as much immediate right now, but I would argue that the Pirates trades have been on the bad side of that equation. If you look at, where's Hudson Head? Where's Eddie Yeen? Where's Drake Fellows? Where's Miguel Yajure was another guy who was really supposed to be a part of things in the Taillon trade. Hasn't done much. Kanan Smith and Jigba, I've liked what he's done to this point, but hurts his wrist. He's done for the year. There just hasn't been a ton to really feel good about other than Rowe and Bednar, and Andy Rodriguez is part of the Musgrove trade as well. But I mean, Omar Cruz, he's likely going to top out as a AAA left-handed reliever. That's great, but that's, not worth giving up a guy who's a legitimate Cy Young candidate. You need to maximize what you're getting and do a better job trading pieces into things. And, I think the Pirates need to draw a line in the sand where it makes sense. Like O'Neal Cruz would be a line in the sand that makes sense to me, where you try to buy out his, 2 free agency years or whatever, give him a little bit more money, give it up front and get him locked in and, let some of the other guys go. Like, I don't know if it makes sense to sign Bednar at this point. Probably not. Probably you go year to year. Do you mortgage Reynolds into something? I think a case could be made for that, but they need to pick their spots. And then when they do trade guys, again, like we're talking about, they have to do a better job of executing them.
I would be remiss if I didn't pull at that mention of Keller thread a little bit, because I think, I see the logic in what you're saying, because on paper, Mitch Keller's a guy who's going into will this be the first year of arbitration?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's a first-year arbitration guy, but a guy you still have legitimate control over. I think a lot of fans would see that trade and say, this is why I don't believe in this. If the Pirates traded a guy like Mitch Keller, who they took his years where you're supposed to be getting the most value out of him when he's making the minimum, could not figure him out, then he has one good year, and immediately we're talking about a trade to turn him into players that in theory are just going to become new Mitch Kellers in some people's brains. What would you say to someone who would point to the fact that we're even talking about Mitch Keller in this context as an example of
trading him?
What'd you say?
Did I miss something? Who's saying they're trading him?
Oh, no. You said that he's a guy that they should think about trading in terms of, having an asset that you can flip into something, because you don't have a lot of other guys in that category of guys you can move to boost that amount of trade value that you're getting that other teams are.
Okay. I don't know if I said Keller. I thought I did.
Well, maybe I misheard you.
Yeah. I honestly, I would not trade Mitch. I would not trade Mitch right now. Reynolds was one I considered. I said, I don't think you could trade Bednar. is maybe what it sounded like Keller. I don't know. But I mean, look, I'll just address the Keller thing as I see it. I mean, they should get a pat on the back for what they did this year. But he's also I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, they're kind of behind schedule on him. If you look at what the Pirates need to do, and this is the whole push that they're going for right now, when that service time clock starts ticking, the Pirates need to be getting production out of that player. And that's on the development staff. Like, they need to maximize every minute that they have before that player becomes a free agent. So the fact that they've farted around with Keller for so long and they only get a couple years before they have to make a decision, like, whatever. But I mean, he did pitch well. He should be their opening day starter or darn close next season. He's going to be on an ARB1 deal that's still going to be reasonable. Keep him and pay him. I don't know if I'd trade him or not. Depends on what his camp would be wanting for in terms of an extension. I'd probably just go year to year and say, look, show me what you did last year. Show me that's consistent. And then let's talk midseason. I don't think I'd, hamstring myself over one season of production or less than a season of production. But I get what you're saying, where you're going to have to trade these guys. You're going to have to make unpopular decisions, but they're going to, look at the Rays and a lot of this stuff. Like, when they trade guys, people are upset for a little bit. Blake Snell, they're upset when they trade Blake Snell. But when they bring up other guys, all of a sudden, oh, wait, I have Shane McClanahan here or whatever. You bring guys up that make you forget about the veteran player that you lost.
One of the things that I think we talk a lot about with regard to the rebuild is the good examples of teams that tore down and built back up and won World Series, or at least one pretty big, at least to the extent that Pirates fans should probably be satisfied. One thing we don't talk about is when it doesn't work. And I think we saw a big example this year in Kansas City of a team that...
Sure we talk about when it doesn't work? I feel like that's all we talk about.
Well, I just kind of want to talk through this example of the Kansas City Royals with you, because they started tearing down about 5 years ago. So they're about 2 years ahead of the Pirates in terms of the timeline of tearing down. They promoted a lot of guys this year, and they lost 97 games, so 3 more than the Pirates did. And they fired Dayton Moore, the general manager, who had previously won a World Series for them. He was the guy who guided that World Series team. Where do you think the Pirates are on the scale of, Astros, Cubs, over here, and over here we have the Royals? Where do you think the Pirates are on that continuum right now?
Interesting. If I say they're closer to the Royals than they are the other guys, it's going to be painted as I'm saying that the rebuild's not going to work, and that's not how I feel. But I do think that, like, I'm sitting here looking at what you're talking about, and I've written down on my paper Baltimore, Houston, Cubs, even the Padres and what they've done. And, like, I don't know if I'm putting the Pirates in that category either, because that's a pretty darn bold statement. I would say in the middle of those two camps, and I would hope that they're not in, like, I do think this is going to work. So I guess, farther away from the Kansas City example than I would say. I think it's tough to, come to definitive conclusions at this point. But I think when you zoom out a little bit and you look at, like, what are their options? What's their talent? What's their excitement level like now versus when this started? I think it's better. Is it everything that everybody might have hoped for and wanted? No, they've made mistakes. They've screwed things up, of course. Like, there's been stupid stuff at the major league level, etc. But I don't think it's all terrible. And I do think they have quality players here that even as early as next season, I think some of these guys are going to grow up. And I do think the Pirates win. I think their win total next year starts at least with a 7. I would hope that it starts with an 8.
Wow. I'm certainly not there yet with them in terms of how I feel about where the expectations should be. I think, for me, just to throw out numbers there, I think I'd be happy if I was a Pirates fan if you're at like 69 and maybe pushing the low 70s. I think that segues nicely into my last question for you, Jason, which is, if Dayton Moore, who won a World Series as general manager of the Kansas City Royals, got 5 years before he was let go, and granted, I think he's moved into some different positions within the Royals, so he wasn't exactly involved in the same way, but that rebuild got 5 years before they pushed the plunger on that regime. What's your sense of when would you say fans would have a right to look at the results on the field and say, this isn't good enough? and believe that maybe some more changes should be made. I mean, would the end of 2 years from now? So I guess that would be at the end of 24. Is that a reasonable timeline?
Riot. I mean, well, not actually riot, but they should voice make their voices be known in a relatively tame fashion. Let's put it that way. No, I mean, absolutely, man. Like I think fans should see an improved product next season. I think the Pirates owe it to their fans to do that. I don't think that means that they need to immediately contend for a division title, but like, shoot, I'm looking for the Pirates to like get a legitimate first baseman in the lineup, get another starting pitcher, address the bullpen. I think they can do all that stuff. I was on with Pony and Muller, and they're like freaking out that I said, between 20 and $30 million. Like, that's a reasonable amount of money to add. I don't think that's that much. But they need to add in a couple targeted places. And like, I think you will see progress for next season. If we're sitting here talking about another 100-loss season, turn the heat up as high as it goes. If we're in 2024 and they're not winning and they still stink, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't even legitimize keeping Cherington around at that point. I understand why fans are agitated. I think the biggest crime in this, honestly, Adam, and I've said this to people in the organization about this, is that Bob waited as long as he did to do this stuff. Like this move should have been made. What they did should have been made 2 years prior. Stuff was going stale. They weren't drafting well. They weren't developing well. And they didn't recognize it. They like went into 2019 thinking that the music was still going to sound good. And these guys can't sing the same notes that they used to. So anyway, like you've wasted this fan frustration. And now like you don't really get it on the back end. People want to see a winner. People are going to tune you out. If they're playing crappy baseball in 2024, I wouldn't expect anybody to watch, which is why I think that, in 2023, they need to give their fans a little bit of something. Don't need to contend for the playoffs. I don't think anybody expects that, but like play a reasonable brand of baseball, look better doing it, have better pitching, have some players to get excited about. And like, they need to show people that they know what they're doing here, because if they don't, I think that patience is going to run out.
Yeah, and I think I really like the comparison of where the Pirates were during the last rebuild, and I think that I don't think I felt the inflection point happen at this point. At the end of 2010, going into 2011, I don't know that my expectations were super high at that point, but that was partly because I hadn't seen it done. Certainly in Pittsburgh, and I think we saw those teams can be first place into I think it was certainly July, and they were still in the race in August.
That was the 2012 team, right?
I'm thinking of the 2011 team first, and then those teams were kind of very similar in that they competed and then they just kind of lost it in the last couple of months. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And I guess I'll give you one bonus question. Judging by you've watched a lot of NL Central baseball.
Yep.
How I don't want to hear how reasonable it is to compete league wide. Let's just localize it. Is the state of the division part of the reason that you're maybe a little optimistic?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the Reds are right in the same situation as the Pirates. The Cubs aren't much different than the Pirates. I think this is going to be a weird transition year in St. Louis, although they're certainly ahead of the Pirates. I like what Milwaukee has now better than the Pirates. That's certainly understandable, but I mean, they're not playing in the AL East. They're not playing in the AL Central. I would put the NL Central at this point. I'm just thinking off the cuff here, Adam. But I mean, is there a worse division in baseball? There might not be.
Well, they only had 1 out of 12 playoff teams, so yeah, I mean that's a good marker for right. What teams you can't compete with. Then there's really only one on that list, and that's St. Louis won 93 games,
knocked out in 2 games. I mean, it should be a winnable division. I don't see anybody, immediately making a push for 2023 where you're saying like, oh, the Reds are going to be dominant next year. Like, no, I mean, it should be winnable. That's why a win total in the 70s would not surprise me. Like, I went back to think, as you were saying this, to transition, like 2010, they went 57 and 105. 2011, they went 72 and 90. Following year, 79 and 83. Like, I don't understand why a 72 and 90 isn't possible. It should be possible based on what they should spend this offseason, what they should aim to do. Like, if you have a second half taper where you maybe have to trade some guys, although I wouldn't like it, but just some performance that wanes, fine. But I mean, you can't lose 100. You just can't lose 100. And I'd like them to avoid losing 90 if they can. I think that would help morale because people are agitated, and you know that. But I think they are certainly capable of playing better baseball.
Absolutely, and I think this was a great conversation, Jason, because I wanted to kind of give some voice to people who know, because I think there's, in Pittsburgh, you kind of grade people on a scale, and some just want to see them spend or just press fast forward to the point that Bob Nutting's either going to spend or he's not to get this team to the next level. But we're I think still a ways away from that, and I think it's reasonable for people to want to talk about, who are informed and understand why we can't have that conversation now, but still see some issues and still want to press those a little bit with someone who knows as much about this franchise as you. So I appreciate you taking the time. Do you have any final thoughts in terms of how the rebuild's going and stuff?
No, I mean, I've basically said what I'd like to say. I think Bob's going to talk this offseason, and I think he should talk this offseason. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say. I mean, he hasn't spoken to a group since basically he hired Travis Williams. Like, he hasn't given sort of an update on how he thinks this is going. That was October of 2019. I believe Pirate Fest that year, I got Bob one-on-one, and then I did a one-on-one thing with him down at Pirate City. But I mean, when he talks, it's going to be interesting. Like, are you okay with this? What's your timeline for, when you guys are going to be good? So anyway, that's just something to think about. I think that's something that as a beat reporter or whatever the heck I am these days, like, something I have my eyes and ears on. I'm really curious to see how the owner handles himself with that stuff. But, I don't think they're going to make many changes this offseason. I do think they'll sign some people, and, it's on the people who are in the organization, Adam, to play better ball and give the fans what they deserve.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you.
We should do this more often. I really enjoyed this. This is genuinely fun, man. I don't.
I think
long-form baseball with people a lot. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I want to do more of this for sure. We're just still kind of figuring out the schedule, but in terms of YouTube, but I think we're learning a lot. And as much conversation like this as we can get is great. So thank you for taking the time, and I'm sure you're going to keep asking the questions that everyone wants to ask. So keep doing that for everyone, and we can talk about it on here after you do it and kind of parse things through. Otherwise, everyone, the rest of the week, like I said, we're going to have the North Shore Drive back on Wednesday. Jason, are you going back on with Chris tomorrow?
I don't know. We'll find out. That usually comes together on like Wednesday morning. I think we'll probably be talking a fair amount of Penguin stuff, I would guess. I don't know. But yeah, Wednesday has been my day with Carter, but my job has changed, so I don't know if I'm still doing Wednesdays with Carter.
We'll see. Stay tuned.
Hopefully people on this channel aren't subjected to back-to-back days of Mackey, but I guess if they are, we'll work it out.
Well, Chris will be talking to someone. I think he'll be talking to Ray Fittipaldo later in the week. Brian Bacco hopped on Monday this week. He usually does Friday, so you might be seeing Ray later in the week. And, of course, we'll have the college football show on Thursday. Huge week of games. Penn State, Michigan, up in Ann Arbor. So Andrew Destin, Noah Hiles will set you up for that. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys on Sunday for Steelers versus Buccaneers. Me and Paul Zeiss will be here after the game with our chat. That's been doing great as well. So thank you all for the support. Smash that like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please consider that subscription deal I mentioned earlier. It'll be in the description as well as Jason's 10 Thoughts post. And that's all I got for you today, everyone. So take care and be safe out there.